My wife laughed when she signed the last page. It was the light, easy sound people make when the ending feels obvious. A polite laugh for the room, a small victory lap in a courthouse that smelled like paper and radiator dust. Her pen ticked, the clerk shuffled, her lawyer relaxed his shoulders as if the story had finished exactly the way it looked from the cheap suits in the back row. Then the judge read my net worth into the record, and the room held its breath the way a field holds its breath before lightning. The radiator hissed, the clerk's eyes lifted, my wife's jaw found stillness. I felt the number land on the wood between us like a quiet hammer. I had seen the figure in black and white many times. Hearing it out loud was like stepping outside my own house and knocking to be let back in. Everything that followed, paperwork moving, faces recalibrating, the new gravity in the air, was earned years before in rooms most people avoid. Fluorescent light, concrete floors, machines that never blink, spreadsheets that only reward patience. If this is a story at all, it is not about a courtroom. It is about the unglamorous arithmetic of small decisions and the price of being mistaken for a man who never made any. I did not start rich, and I did not dress like someone who expected to be. The first suit I owned smelled faintly of the plastic garment bag for longer than a suit should. I kept receipts in a shoebox and admiration in a quiet place. I liked books with tables and appendices. I liked numbers that told the truth after a few hours of interrogation. When I married Nora, we were careful in the way people are careful when rent is a monthly cliff and the next ledge is always one paycheck away. I studied ledgers at night as an assistant auditor at a middling hotel. She staged houses in sunlight and camera lenses so that empty rooms looked like future Sundays. Her talent sat in the airy spaces where people picture themselves. Mine lived in the margins where math forgets to brag. We did not speak the same language about money. She loved what it could invite. I loved what it could quietly build. For a while, the differences braided together into something livable. I learned that a good lamp can make a used couch look like a promise. She learned that a prepaid card can keep your car insurance honest. We planned to meet in the middle someday, in a place with decent coffee and a mortgage the size of a secret. The laundromat arrived like a dare wrapped in lint. The owner wanted out. The books had the exhausted look of a life that had been held together by sweeps and shrugs. He showed me what he called a cash cow, and what I saw as a tired animal with a strong heart and bad shoes. The price felt steep for a room full of machines that fought back with the smell of damp metal. The lease was cruel about everything except square footage. My hands were not made for metal, but my mind liked the predictability of cycles. Spin, drain, rinse, repeat. Quarters in, gallons out, kilowatts per hour like a metronome. I wasn't in love with it. I was in love with the way it offered honest numbers if you paid attention longer than most people could stand. The first real lever came at 2 a.m, 3 months in, when I noticed the coin counter's rhythm did not match the day's footprints. It wasn't theft, which is the first lazy story we tell ourselves when numbers disappoint. It was architecture. Fees in the wrong places, deals made for a different decade. Card processing that punished small transactions, and a change machine calibrated for a customer base that no longer existed. A bank across town with a community charter no one had bothered to read, offering bulk coin discounts that would make a quiet difference if someone cared enough to show up at 8 a.m. with labeled bags and respect. I moved the fees a cent at a time the way a careful person moves furniture alone. I renegotiated the card tiers. I scheduled pickups when trucks were already rolling for the bank's retail partners. I replaced an entire run of fluorescent bulbs with low-Kelvin LEDs, because 9 cents an hour over 100 fixtures is a story if you let it be. The numbers changed in ways imperceptible to anyone who required applause. They changed enough to oxygenate our life. 6 months later, I bought a broken soda machine from a closing pizza place, rebuilt it with a flashlight and stubbornness, and learned what a gentle hum should sound like at 3 p.m. in a room that sells carbonation to people who wait for rent cycles.
2 months after that, an ATM provider needed a pilot location for a lower surcharge program tied to a marketing co-op. The margins were thin, the float was not. People who mock small cash businesses rarely do the math on the float. Cash that sits in a box can sit in your life instead, if you time the order and the pickup with silly precision, and a willingness to become intimate with armored car schedules. A laundromat is also a tiny bank if you treat it with respect and never get cute. I fell in love with ratios. Water per pound, electricity per minute, labor per hour with a safety net for human days. I gave raises to the attendants and wrote them into the model first, not after. Generosity is easier to sustain when you understand the machine better than it understands you. It still did not save my marriage. Money seldom fixes what starts as weather. We began to live in different seasons under the same roof. She brought home photos of staging jobs that made blank spaces look like hope. I brought home 2 pages of numbers that made ugly spaces look solvable. Those are not enemies. They simply do not dine together without careful translation. The second laundromat came with a roof that leaked in a way that mocked buckets. I bought it anyway because the lot behind it faced a road scheduled by the city for resurfacing and a new left turn lane. Traffic is oxygen if you sell anything that forgives cash. I financed the roof with a vendor note and a contractor who let me pay with a schedule built around seasons. I put up 2 billboards on the roofline and sold the space to a tutoring company in the school district. The margin on those boards made the loan payment look smaller. Double use is where small businesses stop wheezing. I bought a self-serve car wash that everybody said was dying and read water company reports for 3 weeks until I saw the pattern under the winter salt. I installed a heated mat in the dog wash bay and turned a Saturday liability into a Sunday line. The dog photos on Instagram did more marketing for the bay than any flyer I could have written. I set up a small waste oil collection contract with a diner 4 blocks away and got paid to do what I already did, be at the property and care.
I learned that every machine economy hides 5 smaller economies inside it: payments, power, parts, people, and quiet attention. If you get 4 right and do not abuse the 5th, your life changes. While I bought machines that spin, my wife's life filled with surfaces that do not tolerate fingerprints. The home she staged went on to sell for numbers that made our zip code feel like a brag. She became good at recommending objects that made other people imagine better versions of themselves. That is honest work. It has a cost when the person you come home to prefers objects that make numbers imagine better versions of themselves. Admiration became duty, and then became a kind of loneliness that has no violent seams, only the kind of patience that goes brittle. We started to speak less. When we did speak, it was about logistics and the things that calendar demands. The marriage became a business with poor branding. We tried the usual repair measures. They solved the schedule and not the seasons. Then one day the calendar asked for signatures where affection used to be. I was not secretive about money. I was quiet. There is a difference, and a courtroom can tell. I built a holding company because the bank insisted on a parent and a structure. I appointed a board of 1 because capital in this country respects nouns. I incorporated each site into its own entity because a lawyer with a calm haircut told me liability lives in containers. I paid every tax that showed up, sometimes twice to be sure, and then argued gently for what had been overpaid the previous quarter. I did not buy cars. I bought belts for machines and time for employees to go to parent-teacher conferences without fear. A year before the courthouse, a regional operator made me an offer for the laundromats that would have let me pretend I belonged in rooms with bottled water on tables. I said not yet, and asked to keep a small minority stake if a sale happened later at a number tied to honest EBITDA and not the fantasy charts bankers use in December. They shrugged because people shrug when the person across from them is wearing a thrift store suit and asking for patience. The same operator returned 20 months later with a letter that people who write letters call firm. The multiple was higher, the terms were boring in the best way. I said yes to a future I could measure. The deal moved toward closing with the slow inevitability of an aircraft pushback. My share would not look like madness on paper, just a decade of lint somehow agreeing to become clean. While that happened, my marriage ended the way paper ends in offices: quiet corridors, names and headers, paragraphs that try to turn feelings into geometry. We divided the parts of our life that legally divide. Some were easy, some were surprisingly sharp.
We stepped out of our house and into two smaller ones that looked like branches from the same tree cut at different heights. By the time we reached the wooden benches and fluorescent light of the courtroom, the acquisition had moved from letterhead to escrow. The judge's docket expected an ordinary morning. The clerks expected stories that rhymed with other stories. My wife expected to sign a set of papers that would place me in the category people in cities use to describe men in inexpensive shoes. Her laugh at the end of the signature, the small release valve, belonged to that category. The judge's voice carried across the room like an accountant who had learned rhythm late. He read the figure the way the state asks him to read figures, without opinion. My wife's lawyer leaned forward, out of reflex. The clerk looked at her screen a beat longer. The air in the room did the thing air does when a story finds a hinge.
It wasn't a fortune that makes magazines. It was a number with commas and context that lives inside NDA envelopes and wire instructions with hold periods. The court had the documentation because I gave it to them. The value came from the formal appraisal for the closing. The liquidity came from the portion scheduled for the wire. The rest was the percentage I kept. It lay on purpose, because long games taste better than headlines. The judge read it because he was supposed to read it. The room heard it because it was not what the room had been taught to expect from a man in a jacket that did not know the word bespoke. Surprise is a poor currency in court. The law likes things that age well. But the human part of the room had its moment. I understood it. I have been wrong about people before. It is humbling to be wrong without cruelty in the room to distract you. None of this turned me into someone else. After the hearing, I went home to a place with a single chair I liked and a window that faced a street I understood by the sound of its trucks. I made coffee in a chipped mug. I opened a spreadsheet and adjusted a line item that would cover raises at the car wash when winter finally quit. I scheduled the service on 2 motors before they lied to me in July. I sent a bonus to the attendant who had stayed late on a Tuesday to help a father corral twins. Wealth is more interesting when it becomes other people's relief. After the divorce, the acquisition closed. The wire arrived the way large numbers do, as plain text on a screen, devoid of ceremony, indifferent about decimals, indifferent to the years that built it. I did not buy a symbol. I paid taxes like a citizen and a little extra like someone who has read too many op-eds. I funded a maintenance reserve for properties I no longer controlled because people still use them and machines still forget their manners. I moved a slice into a boring portfolio built out of companies that treat employees like adults. I increased wages at the remaining businesses and wrote it into the model so no one would have to ask me twice. I did not gloat. That is a wasteful verb. I felt relief, then grief for the marriage, then a long calm, like the moment after a hot machine goes quiet and you can finally hear yourself think. Surprise in the courtroom did not change the fact that two people who once believed shared mornings were inevitable had become atoms again, moving on distinct paths. Friends asked how it had happened without anyone noticing. The truth is not cinematic. I was simply quiet in a culture that rewards announcements. I wore the same jacket because it fit the calendar I kept. I bought belts for the machines and brakes for the truck and time for the people. I read city council agendas for hints about paving projects and water rates. I learned the birthdays of the clerks who make permits move. I kept a logbook of cycles that would bore anyone who requires applause to feel alive. The net worth grew in places with bad lighting, and then one day a person in a robe read the sum like it had always been obvious. There are other parts of the story that do not belong to the courtroom. The morning I found a handwritten thank you note from a woman who had been using the dog wash bay to clean boots because the city water was shut off at her block. The night I changed a belt at 11 p.m. in August, and a teenager watched quietly for 20 minutes and then asked for a job in a voice that had been practicing courage. The week I negotiated a billboard lease that let a tutoring company give away Saturday sessions to 3 kids at a school where the buses arrive late in winter. The month the bank lowered our coin handling rates because I brought coffee to the branch manager and a simple chart to the meeting. The first Christmas after the divorce, when the car wash closed early because the temperature and the wind were not fit for people, and every sheet in my model agreed.
My wife moved into a place with better windows. She built a staging firm that did work I would have admired even if I did not know her name. We did not make enemies out of each other. We made lives that made more sense for each of us. She stopped laughing at men in thrift store suits because the category had betrayed her. I stopped assuming that beautiful surfaces hate numbers. Both are stereotypes that do no one any favors. When I think about the day in court, I do not replay the silence after the judge spoke. I replay the way the clerk's pencil hovered over a form for a second, and then found the line again. Work continued. Paper continued. The state did what it always does. A laugh before the reading, a number after. Two people leaving the building by different doors into the same weather. If there is a lesson, it lives in the unglamorous corner where patience is not celebrated. Most wealth that is durable arrives disguised as monotony. Most marriages that die do so quietly, one unshared sentence at a time. If you are lucky, the money gives you choices you can live with, and the ending gives you sentences you can say without flinching. My net worth being read into the record did not change the temperature of the air in rooms where machines spin. It did not change the way gratitude sounds when an employee leaves a note on a counter after a long day because the tips were good and the customers were decent. It did not change the way I sit with coffee at a window that faces a street where people carry groceries past a bus stop that never seems to be where anyone needs it to be. The story keeps its shape in a few objects that do not look like symbols. A worn-out squeegee with a handle wrapped in electrical tape. A ledger with a coffee ring on the margin where the sales tax line sits. A light over a change machine that no longer buzzes because someone climbed a ladder and cared about ballast. A letter from a buyer with too many nouns and just enough regret. A stack of W-2s for people who know the names of my kids and bring them stickers from the dentist. The number the judge read was a summary, not a destination. Net worth does not keep the floor clean or the winter air out of the bathroom where toddlers cry because dryers are loud. It does not make a marriage worthy or a man good. It allows a certain kind of quiet choice, work with dignity, time with people who do not require translation, giving that does not need a speech. It lets you fix things faster without being asked twice. It lets you sleep through some storms and wake early for others.
I sometimes visit the first laundromat on Sunday mornings when the light is forgiving and the regulars are half awake. The new owner kept most of the changes and made a few I admire. The coin counter still runs loud. The change machine still carries itself like a stout uncle at a wedding. The old fluorescent fixtures are gone. The room feels less like a glare and more like a promise. I buy a soda I do not need and sit for a minute on a plastic chair to listen to the cycles lining up like polite runners. Then I leave through the back door and walk the alley where we used to keep the dumpster before the city moved it out of pity. I think about the laugh sometimes, not with spite, just with the curiosity you keep for a sound that changes meaning when context arrives. In one life, it was dismissal. In the life that followed, it became a marker that told me where the hinge had been all along. The judge's voice, the number, the silence, the steady shuffle of forms, these are the surface of the story. The underneath is made of lint and belts, of pennies placed where they matter, of people who deserve a day that is a little easier than the day before. The courthouse morning ended with signatures that made two lives simpler by being separate. The afternoon ended with an email that confirmed a wire and a future that would always be written in small numbers before it ever found a large one. The evening ended with a spreadsheet and a schedule and a note to myself to call a man named Luis about a part he had promised but would forget unless nudged, and a reminder to send flowers to an attendant who had lost her grandmother and still showed up to open at 6 because people show up when they live in the long game. If you stood me up in that courtroom again, I would sit in the same suit and let the room think whatever it needed to think. I would not perform for anyone. I would let the number do its small, decisive job, and then I would go home to quiet work, because that is where this story was written in the first place. Not on a bench under a seal, but in the hum of machines that do not care who you are, only that you respect the cycle and pay attention when the rhythm changes. The laugh belonged to a person I loved once, and will always wish well. The number belonged to a decade that did not ask for applause. The life that followed belongs to mornings where something simple gets better,
not because the judge read a figure, but because a man in an ordinary jacket learned to hear the difference between noise and a story worth living.